Welcome to this week's episode of the FSC Radio. This week we have Jake Noel-Storr with us, talking about himself, his projects, and kind of rounding everything up before we break for summer. So, hello.
Hello.
Could you introduce yourselves in a few short words?
Yeah, I'm Jake Noel-Storr. I'm a lecturer in Captine for astronomy and also the team leader for physics, astronomy and math practical teachers for the FSE.
Sounds very complicated. Is there more of a, I guess your area of research, is that slightly more easy to understand? We've had, I think, your colleague Scott, and we've talked about, what did we talk about with him?
Too much.
He usually talks about his instrument he's putting on a telescope at La Palma.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Probably that's what he talks about.
Yes. And
Colonizing Mars.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so most of my science background was in supermassive black holes in the centers of galaxies, but most of my research and work after that is in astronomy education and inclusivity and diversity in astronomy as well. So actually looking at how those things work around the world.
That sounds really interesting. That's when we did a bit of our research for preparing, that was like the thing that jumped out at me, because it's not usual you see people, especially in sciences, sort of militating for inclusion. It's more of a open for all, but not really. How do you do you do research in the field, or?
Yeah, some research in the field and then a lot of just advocating, and I'm currently the co-chair for the International Astronomical Union Committee for Diversity and Inclusion in Astronomy, and also for the European Astronomical Society Committee for the same thing.
And what kind of activities do you do for those committees?
Well, a lot of that is really sort of policy kind of work, or making recommendations and planning for the organizations that's on the European or on the international scale. So thinking about how those organizations both have a lot of member organizations in separate countries, and thinking about how we can work with all of those together to promote inclusion and diversity around the world as much as possible, and make astronomy be a safe space for diverse groups everywhere. But on the international scale, it's also a lot of our time is spent looking at what you consider to be diversity, because depends on what country you're in, who is the majority and who's the minority, and also then globally, what's the majority and minority in astronomy. So trying to put all of those aspects together and then making statements and recommendations to help guide people in their thinking.
Are there any specific, well, I don't think that there are any easy fixes for this problem, but is there one recommendation that would sort of be a great leap forward into inclusion in astronomy, or?
I don't think there's really there's no real simple easy answer, because it's not a very exclusive field in terms of the people who are there. They're all friendly people, but if you look at the older generations, what you see is old white guys who we imagine sit on top of mountains gazing through telescopes. And so when you're trying to diversify that, it's hard, because you really have to come from the bottom up, because there is no top down that exists in it. So really thinking about how to do that is also a problem. And if you look at, for example, how gender has changed over time, in younger generations, the gender mix is much improved, and in our first year bachelor students, it's a very even mix, pretty much. But then as you go to senior astronomers, you get the same problem, and people will say it hasn't changed over really a decade, which is true, but not because the gender balance hasn't changed, also the actual physical human beings haven't changed, because scientists, as you know, don't like to retire and will just keep being there forever, and healthcare has improved over the centuries, so people cling on for a bit longer to their work life. So that sort of makes that a hard statistic for people to look at and think about.
Well, so is part of inclusion in sciences is part of that also just promoting younger scientists to the top of the hill, so to speak.
So you're trying to always think about how you're helping a broader range of people get there, but there's not necessarily more and more jobs. You probably know that our number of physics students and astronomy students is going up and up every year here, and you can't hope that all of them are going to become astronomers, because there's not that many astronomers in the world. So they're going to be going out and doing other things, which you also want to do in a diverse and inclusive way across those careers. But you want to make sure that every career within the field supports diversity and inclusion, and you're not keeping this directed focus on, well, this system was really built for white guys getting to senior roles. And globally, that was how the system was built as well. So people say it's a broken system, but if people working in inclusion diversity will say it's not actually a broken system. The system is exactly what it was built for. It was built to support these white guys getting to senior roles, which it does beautifully. So it's not a broken system. It's just probably not the one that you want to have if you want to get diversity and inclusion.
So like, do you think like when you're working with like diversity and inclusion in the sciences, do you think there's ever like a point where like you reach? Do you think you ever reach a point where like, yes, we've achieved diversity and inclusion, like this is it, we finished it, or is it like the sciences where you like keep improving as it keeps going on and there isn't really an end? Like it just keeps going.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever an end, and I think people's understanding of what it means changes a lot as well. I mean, in the 90s, it was a lot of focus about women in science in particular, whereas now you'd be more concerned about gender in science as a whole and looking at all of those different aspects and not so binary about things, but also thinking about how indeed that only is looking at one thing and maybe actually less inclusive than it sounds like. Like you've probably seen women in science and girls in science activities that happen all the time, which technically aren't inclusive. They're trying to support a particular group that is underrepresented in the physical sciences especially, but it's not what you would describe as inclusive things. So you probably have to do these non-inclusive things to work towards being more inclusive in the end of the day too.
Yeah, that's actually something that really annoyed me when I came into when I was choosing a bachelor. I remember that there was like girls in science. Oh, go to our university, do a day of like girls in science activities, and it was like making nail polish. Like, I don't care. That's not. I don't feel like. I guess I'm a woman. I don't care about it that much. Stop saying that this is an inclusive event. It's not an inclusive event. You don't include me. Well, okay, that's. There have to be different activities for different kinds of people, of course. But I don't know. That was my women in science rant, I guess. It's like,
yeah,
no.
you can be equally badly stereotyping in that direction. I think is a problem,
Yeah.
and it can be off-putting. Like you said, I worked in the US for a long time and evaluated a lot of NASA education and outreach projects. And one was a poster that they had made at some point that was for careers in NASA, but everyone in the poster was female. And so then when we tested this with different audiences, it made girls just feel very suspicious about why NASA had to prove so hard that it was okay to work for NASA if you were a girl, which made them feel like, well, it must not be true. If you have to prove it so hard, then it seems like I should be worried about something.
Yeah, it's like, oh, are these all the women in NASA? Okay.
Yeah.
And since you've been kind of working more closely to the subject, do you find that you can see the changes that have happened in the industry? Or at least the steps towards change?
Yeah, you can definitely see good steps towards change. You can see, in astronomy in particular in the Netherlands, we have every university with astronomy PhD programs, and all of the research institutes have representatives now on a national inclusion and diversity committee. So really working towards making this a part of the national thing and the national thinking in terms of astronomy. So you see certainly good change in making people think about it, and then just need to move to the change of people having good action about it, which is step 2, I guess. But certainly the conversation has increased a lot over the last years, and I think people's understanding that they should care about it has increased over the last years, and then just need to find more ways of helping people understand what it is that they need to understand, because that is a lot of times where people make mistakes and people make vast assumptions about other people without actually asking that group of people what was the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Has your understanding changed at all from like what it used to be when you say like 10 years ago?
Probably. I think now that I look much more about the intersectionality of things. So, like when you take into account race and ethnicity and gender and sexuality and all of those things and put them together and find, like, you know, people are all people, but they're all clearly defined people, and it's hard to put people in boxes, and you don't want to make people have to be a certain way to fit there. So I think, you know, the way that you want to make the environment right for people is sort of changed in my mind, that how to make it inclusive is more about making the people be inclusive more than necessarily the space or the law.
Yeah. Like by inclusivity, like, do you think there should be a more of emphasis on like everyone understands each other and like respects them and like treats them like just treats them with respect, or like is it that everyone is like blind towards like how everyone else is, but like treats everyone the exact same way? Or do you think we should account for, because some people like just because of who they identify as, they have to face certain challenges? Like, do you think by inclusion it means to just ignore them completely and treat them just the same, or take into account?
Absolutely not. And there's everyone uses all the words in different ways, but I would say that what you described there is equality when you treat everyone exactly the same. But equality doesn't really work because everyone is coming in differently. So if you treat everyone equally, then you've got a problem because everyone isn't equal. So
yeah, that's what I was trying. The equality versus equity.
And so then equity is then making sure that those first differences in the unequalness of people are then accounted for in your end game or whatever you're doing, so that you've got that that you've moved to that equity instead of saying, okay, everyone needs the same thing. There's this example people always show of people trying to watch a baseball game.
Oh yeah, I've seen. Yeah,
don't know why everyone's so desperate to watch this baseball game, but yeah, that's exactly the same thing. Like, do you give everyone one box to stand on so they can see over the fence, but still the shortest person can't see over the fence because the box wasn't big enough and the tallest person didn't need the box in the first place, so why have they got one? And it's only sort of when you take the fence away is what you see as a problem. But I also like to make people, in my talks, I have a flipped around slide, so you're looking from the game at the fence, because that's really the side that we're coming from, and then saying, who do you see on the other side of the fence? And the answer is you see this one tall guy, so you don't even have an idea that anyone's got a problem necessarily. So and then if you don't know they've got the problem, then they're going to stop showing up because they can't see the game. And so if eventually you do go and look over the fence and say, who is there? You just see the tall guy, but because he's the only one that came in the end, because why would the others bother even coming to show up? So I think that's a lot of the mentality that you have to be in, that you're on the game playing side of the fence, so you have to keep aware that you're not really you aren't seeing what's going on the other side of the fence.
So in like in the scientific field, like to promote inclusion, how do you exactly look over the fence? Like as someone in the scientific field, how do you promote inclusion?
With difficulty, but a lot of it you have to take into account things that you know about differences between different people, and there's a lot of socioeconomic differences between people coming into university. How first generation students whose parents didn't go to university have a lot harder time in their first year because it's really a different mentality their family didn't have. So really thinking about, okay, how do you make the system equitable for them? And the way to do it is not by having sessions for the poor kids to go to, because this doesn't make them feel like they're being included or equitable, but it's making sure that they've got the right support is built into the system, but everyone can access that support as well. And there's a lot of stuff about sort of gender in science, and I was working on a National Science Foundation grant for a little bit in the US, and that grant program was large scale for universities to change their whole attitude to gender. And after they'd run the program for a few years, they changed the rules so that now in your proposal, you can only do things that apply to everybody. You can't just do things for women. So things like, if you want to change the amount of maternity leave women had when they were pregnant, you have to make it the amount of family leave, and guys have to be able to qualify for the same amount of time, so that you're actually making it equitable. It's helping the women by giving them more family time, also helping them by making the guy have enough time to come so they can go back to work too. So in terms of that, it's sort of equity that helps more equity, and so those sort of things are what you have to look for. But it's all very tricky because it's very easy to say, okay, this group needs this help, so we'll give it to them, and then immediately you're being like cutting them out and saying, okay, you needed this help.
Help over.
Yeah, and then the thing with the family leave is also like if there is just a cultural expectation that the man goes back to work and the women stay home to like take care of the kids, then even if the men have like some extra leave, they might just say, well, I'm just not taking that, I'm just going back to work because that's what's expected of me. So there's just also a limited amount of things you can actually do without changing the entire culture, which is even more implausible.
And some companies like Microsoft have tried things like that, where each parent gets the same amount of family leave and is made to take the same amount of family leave. Yeah. They don't have to take it at the same time, so a lot of times they'll stagger it in the first years of the kid's life, so that makes it a much more balanced and equitable system. But then saying, okay, we're not letting guys get ahead in the game by never having to look after the kids, but also it's better for their family if they spend equal time looking after the kids too. So
how do you actually, like you said, you research in the field, right? What does research in the field look like? How do you think of such strategies? Because it all seems so like abstract in terms of like when you think of like executive like rules
I mean,
and stuff.
a lot of that is sort of thinking of and looking at policy decisions that are made on different scales or different examples of how things have worked successfully and badly around the world. But also, I mean, with our committees and international activities, spend a lot of time thinking about how to do surveys and collect data, but also this can be very tricky because, especially on the global scale, there's places where, it's very dangerous for people to put on the survey that they're gay, for example. So you then don't want to... So your impression about where all the gay astronomers live in the world is not equal to where all the gay astronomers live in the world, probably because it's more equal to how safe you are about being a gay astronomer in the world. And the same goes for women or people identifying gender and in any way. And then also how you're looking at race and ethnicity as it changes from country to country to country, how you define that, and also what are the important minorities changes a lot place to place to place.
You said you worked in the US a bit. How do you find the, conversations around inclusivity different from here?
They're weirdly different. I mean, I think they're both, high up the scale of inclusivity. I think the Netherlands is much, much more inclusive than the US is, and is a much safer space for a lot of people than the US is. But I think that here, that's a lot of people's mentality, that this is a very great society and we don't have any of these problems. So problem one is that I think there's a bit less recognition that the problems happen here. And in the US, there's more recognition that they have the problems, but I think they're worse at solving them because they're very much into the categorizing people and saying, you need this help and you need this help. You're Hispanic, so you need this help. You're Black, so you need this help. You're Native American, so you need this help. And not trying to think about how to make things actually more inclusive, which mostly comes of the way the US government works. So it's hard for them to get around those kind of things. But
do you work closely with governments? Oh, sorry, I just cut you off.
No problem. Say that again.
Do you work closely with governments?
Only through government agencies. I've worked for stuff with NASA and the National Science Foundation that are government agencies in the US, and then some of the stuff we do, with the International Astronomical Union, gets back to sort of government level organizations or organizations that talk to governments in the different countries that work there. So we sort of have this slow winding pipeline that some government people might hear about one day. But again, it's much easier, I think, to come sort of bottom upwards and make your community be proactive this way, and then see we have people in AI departments in the Netherlands are now asking us in our astronomy departments, what do you do? How do we set up this national committee for inclusion and diversity in artificial intelligence because they want to expand. They see what we're doing, and so I think you can grow it cross fields in those ways as well.
Do you think that like the experiences from astronomy would generalize to other sciences, or are there like challenges specifically to astronomy?
I think there's some astronomy specific challenges, probably, and it's a very, each science is unique in how it works. It's unique in its history, especially, and it's unique in the population that does it. I think a lot of the physical sciences are along the same lines, broadly speaking, but there's also some differences there. If you get to the life sciences, the situation is quite a lot different as well. But in things like computer science, it's way more extremely like male dominated than anything else in science. So that is also all a spectrum. That astronomy is somewhere in this spectrum of that. And I think, we have useful lessons, and there's stuff that is definitely astronomy based, and I think mostly that's because of the small number of people in a lot of places as well. So the community is always very small everywhere because you don't need millions of astronomers. So you always have a lot more biologists and chemists than you have astronomers. So their interactions can be a lot more sort of disparate. Whereas in astronomy, you've got your set of colleagues, it's pretty tight-knit, and everyone knows everyone and everyone knows everything that's going on, that can make wherever there's tensions be a lot more tense because it's like everybody knows.
Yeah. Like a small insular sort of community.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I study artificial intelligence, and a lot of the the things you hear about with regards to diversity and inclusion is really in, for example, data set collection. Like the people who coded all the data sets, like in the 1970s, they were all like old white men, and they put tags on photos that were like, if you look at them now, it's like, this is not okay. And if you look at if you look at those then, it would also not be okay. But they just, I don't know, there was no one to say, hey, maybe don't tag this photo like this, So there's just a lot of stuff in the input side that is, old-fashioned, let's just say it like that. But then, I don't know if that, like, everyone tries to change it and tries to talk about it, but and there are like initiatives to sort of diversify code and diversify AI and data sets and stuff. But if I look at the faculty here, it's all still pretty old white men and some older white woman.
Yeah, and a lot of factors there is from the baby boom generation. There was lots of them, and then my generation, younger than the baby boom, was we had hardly any people. So there's still this big disparity, age-wise, of where people are in their career. So again, that younger chunk hasn't got there. But I think one thing that's important for AI in that way, and also in astronomy, is that you can't necessarily fix the history. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very hard to go backwards in time and do some historical repair, because if the field was all old white guys with wearing curly beards in whatever Middle England, then that's what it was. And you can find some in some other cultures and include things from China, include things from India that were happening at the same time, but still the predominant path of what was happening was there. And so it's very hard to try to force extra history, or find your women astronomers from the past, of which there are some good examples, but sometimes people put too much pressure to try to find this whole field. And the same thing with that, I think in AI you can't, the history is the history, and so you can accept that it was a history and accept that it was wrong, but that is what happened, and you can't rewrite the history.
You can't rewrite the history, but there are, like, you can, for instance, not use certain
you can fix its consequences for sure, and then be aware of what you're doing in that way, definitely.
Or when you introduce stuff in lectures, like, oh, maybe don't use the old data set, but use some new data set when you're talking about, like, AI to first-year students, that sort of thing. Yeah. But that is, I guess, pretty... those are actionable things, but they are not, they're not going to change diversity and inclusion overall. But that's also not something that can be done?
I think they do bit by bit, so I
Yeah.
think you have to just aim for that bit by bit change, and all of those little pieces add together, because you have to think about how did people get this mentality in the first place, and then slowly untangle that mentality back outwards, and which isn't going to be a sudden big change,
Yeah.
but understanding where it came from and then how you can divert it now is the way to go, because it's not that people have this one thing that makes them like this. It's
No,
like
no.
you have all of these experiences just added up little pieces here and there, so then you've ended up with a whole field that looks like this, and then you can be like,
Yeah.
okay, how do we untangle this in the same kind of way of gently looking item by item?
So it's like small things matter. Even, yeah, small things might add up over time to produce a more inclusive, like, academic culture or stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you think, as someone who's like a non-white, non-male in the scientific community, have like extra pressure on them? Because if you don't do well, they'll just be like, oh, he just got to where, or like she or like whoever just got to wherever they got just because they were trying to promote
Yeah.
certain people to these positions, or like, or I mean, or flip the question, if you're like, or if you have someone like who, oh, I know, just saying this feels so weird, but if you have like
token representation.
what?
Token representation. So like you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah,
get
I mean,
to
yeah,
department
people
and you're
just
the one.
people just put you under that light. But like, do you yeah, basically like that? Do you think there's like some pressure on you to do like that much better to prove that you deserve what you have?
In some ways, I think that pressure is probably on people. I think it leads to a lot of imposter syndrome. That means that people don't know if they really
Yeah.
deserve to be there. And how people look at these people may also be questioning if this person is imposter.
Yeah.
Like, how did you get this job? So I think some of that does exist, but again, you still need to have some pathways that do encourage people that they can apply for the position, and do something about how you're making sure that you have diverse representation in your applicants and then who gets selected. And if you don't, investigating the reasons why not is more important. But you see things on every job ad from the university says that women are strongly encouraged to apply, and that has those exact implications. That firstly, why are you so desperate that women are applying? So it's sounding like you've got this harsh environment possibly, but then also after you did get a job, you can always be second guessing yourself.
Yeah.
And there's also sort of call like a minority tax on people too, in terms of their time and effort, because a lot of times people will be asked to be on way more committees and give way more talks about diversity and inclusion, because exactly you're not the white guy going to talk, so we'll take anybody else to go speak to people. So that you're sort of proving you've got this inclusion and diversity. But again, that's taking you away from your research time and your professional time to go do those other activities, which may be valuable in order to keep demonstrating that it's inclusive and diverse and keep encouraging that. But on the other hand, for the actual individuals concerned, it's more of a tax on their time.
Yeah, it gets so paradoxical after a point.
Yeah.
How do you deal with something like that? Is that something you've encountered in your career, or is that like how do you deal with something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is an issue as a white guy. So when giving these talks, you sort of have to approach it in that way, and then definitely how you're directing the conversation towards. Also, though, in physical science, there's a lot of white guys, so it's like we can talk on the same page. So I can bring you a message, and people are possibly less resistant to it because they think I'm there. But like for my membership on these committees and when talking about it, I always feel like I have to slip in the fact that I'm gay to make sure that I've got some diversity and inclusion. So I've got some right to be on these committees, and I'm not just this white guy sitting there telling people what to do to be more diverse when I'm not. But I think that's a sort of weird self-outing experience that I keep going through when I'm like, I need to
Did you have like
I sometimes have to just feel like even when I'm giving workshops or talks, sometimes feel like I just need to up my diverse game and just like let it drop that I'm gay, so that people know that I've got some street
Some
cred.
cred,
Yeah.
if you don't mind me asking, did you come out first or did you become a scientist first? Or like did you get an interest in the sciences first?
As a scientist first.
Oh.
I only came out quite late in my career, and only after I stopped working in the US, because I think that's much less of a safe thing to do in the US academic environment than in
so you
Europe.
felt more comfortable moving out. Was that here or?
Yeah.
Oh. And what was that like? Like, if you don't mind me asking, like,
It was
because I've never had to.
It was uneventful, which was in some ways disappointing. But
Like, how do you even come out in the scientific? Like, do you have to write a paper?
no, you just, well, there's online. There's a website called the Astronomy Out List, and on that you can be listed as out or as an ally. And I think I was an ally for a lot of years, and I changed myself to out.
Then
so
you
I
get promoted after a while.
I guess that officially was your astronomy coming out, but otherwise, like exactly, I just mention it in talks about inclusion, diversity, and people know it then. But I definitely wouldn't have done when I was in the US, and now I'm much happier.
But is it like a type of thing where like obviously you have a office where like it's a much close-knit environment, and then you have a community of scientists which is much bigger. Is it like, do you come out to like the community, or were you just like at lunch one day and you stood up at the table and just let everyone know? Like,
I don't know. There was no like dramatic moment.
No, but like, is it like something? Do you come out to your office, or like do you come out in the community? Is like what I'm trying to ask.
I think I probably just did cross community also while moving country and stuff. So it was more safe just to be it, and then people are all not surprised about it, or people are like, well, how come you never told us before? Which I think is hard for some people who haven't come out. They have, there's a lot of stress about what people's reactions are going to be, but both for the reactions of, people who are really negative, but also sort of the shame and guilt of, how long you've been gay before you chose to tell anybody else about it. And, sometimes people who've asked you directly and you've said no to them. So technically been lying to people for years and years, possibly. So that can put a lot of, sort of guilty pressure. But then, in my experience, no one had any reaction at all, which was also kind of like,
that sounds like, I guess that would sound like strangely disappointing. Like, man, this is really important to me.
Yeah, it felt like there should be some reaction. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy with the reaction, I guess, but...
Well, you said you had a kind of a hard time coming out in the US. Was that something that interfered with your academic identity? So who you were as a researcher?
I mean, I guess it put pressure on that, I suppose, but, I didn't personally feel like it does too much, but probably psychologically it does, and, your comfort in your work environment and these things, and, whether you're out at all is then, like that, and people often ask you, like, have you got a wife and kids and all of these things all the time, and if you're not out, that makes you uncomfortable situations because you want to be like, no, I'm just, I just like living alone. It's just all I do. And so I think, there is that sort of stressful factor going on. And it can be worse for a lot of people. And I mean, in the US, I was in New York State for a lot of time where it's not really a problem. And I was in Arizona some of the time where it is more of a problem, but in Tucson, which is more trendy part of Arizona, so probably would not have really been a problem, but, it never felt safe and comfortable to me to do the other thing, so it felt more comfortable to be being made uncomfortable in that way. So I don't know whether that was a right or wrong decision, because you can't go back in history and change it, so... I did what I did.
Is that also something that like changes your interaction with students, or if you're giving a lecture, for example, like is that something that is on your mind, like how you present?
I don't necessarily think so too much. I think you can feel more honest and comfortable with students that you work with when you're being honest and comfortable about yourself to yourself and other people. But I don't think it necessarily makes a distinction the other way. I mean, a big reason for not coming out in the US is what would the student reaction be? Because there's a lot less tolerance amongst students. So you would have students who would definitely have a negative attitude towards you if they knew that you were gay. Well, I think in the Netherlands, student population is much more tolerant and accepting to prove that they can be in the Netherlands as to keep that #1 ranking in the world. But no, I think it's really true, and certainly it feels true in interactions with students that it doesn't make me uncomfortable that students know this about me.
Also, another type of a weird question, but like to relate it to me, like sometimes I don't like my birthday because it's like one day of the year I get so much attention, and then the rest of the year no one cares. For you, is like during like June, is it ever like all the companies care about you? Suddenly they have like the pride flags everywhere, even though they might not actually be that involved in the community. They love to promote pride and all that. And like, you know, one month a year you get all this attention, and the next year you don't. Or is it like the type of thing where you're like, you appreciate that they're trying to, I don't know, be more involved in the community, even though they actually aren't?
Well, there's a lot of stuff about it being corporate or not corporate, and the goals of Pride and Pride Month and all of those things. For me personally, it doesn't really make any difference to me because, well, none of these companies talk to me. So in that way, they're not doing anything that gets me there. It just, you know, means there's more opportunities to buy T-shirts or something. But there's, I mean, otherwise not really a huge difference there. I think it's sad that it sort of turns in some places into a very corporate thing, and some companies shouldn't get away with it, but, you know, on some level at least they're saying that they're on the side of these things happening, and they're trying to show their support in some way. And you don't have to be totally cynical that they're just doing it to make money, because, you know, it's not a big enough population for them to make money off. So it's, I think, not too bad, but I don't, you know, the level of attention and stuff I don't really see as too different. And I think, you know, there's also, in all of these communities of diversity, there's sort of capital letter and lowercase letter members of the community. And the deaf community is particularly into this, that they have big D deaf, which means that you really insist on all of your deaf services being everywhere, that, you know, you won't get a cochlear implant, you even won't do lip reading or text messaging in meetings or something because you think you should have the interpreter, and you want to have all of your rights represented as a member of the deaf community. Or there's small d deaf people who are just deaf and can't hear anything, but don't do any of that other community sort of representation stuff. And I think you have exactly the same thing in the gay community, that you have big G gay and little g gay, and I think you know in your mind what that looks like, and probably is stereotyping, but some people in the community want, you know, really fight for it and make the community very obvious and visible, and then some members of the community you don't even know about or not even out of the closet. So you've got, you know, there's that big difference too. So
what type of community? Which side are you from?
I don't know.
I think so.
middle size. G.
I was gonna
I mean,
say.
I'm not really. I definitely wouldn't put myself in capital G, but, you know,
Like you increase the font a bit.
here I am talking about it, so it's probably a lowercase, you know, but like 18 or 24 point or something. So.
It's a small G but a capital Y.
Could be, small G but stretched big.
Is there ways that, like, I guess as students who don't really have the access of boards and committees, is there a way that people can get more involved in these causes?
I think, well,
diversity in general, not necessarily.
I think you can look at what's going on and try to join anything that you can join committee-wise, or organizations that you can join, or even just start reading more things about it and understanding it from a lot of different perspectives on whichever the issues that you're interested in or not interested in, and try to understand what's going on from other people's perspectives, from those people's perspectives, because you don't have that perspective yourself, no matter how minority or diverse you feel. There's still other perspectives that you can hear this from as well. So there's always impressions to get.
Do you have any messages for our viewers? Is there anything you would like to convey?
Is there anything I would like to convey? Be nice to everyone. We're all people. I think that's not saying sarcastically, but I think that's a really important point to consider, is that, you know, we are all humans, and trying to think of what that means in real life, and really trying to actually think about that difference between equality and equity, and are things that you're doing or how you're acting around other people, are they being in an equity kind of way? And we call that minimizing. So you're doing exactly that, minimizing the difference between people, or are you really doing stuff that's really embracing the differences between people and saying, yes, we're different, but that's a great thing, and I don't want to treat you all the same because you're not the same. So I want to treat everyone differently because you all need to be treated differently because you are all different. So
yeah, treating everyone the same just has to get boring after a point.
That's the main problem with it. It's just boring.
Yeah, but it's very much harder to judge what's fair and not fair when you're not being equitable. So that's why you need to do these things that also benefit everybody, and so give everybody a positive boost, including the people who needed it, but also people who might not have needed it so much. Maybe they use it less because they don't need it, but you've balanced that out a lot more.
Kind of as a last point before we wrap up, when I Googled you, because I will ashamedly admit that I did, one of the first pictures I found is a photo of you and Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
Can we know the story of that?
I'm glad everyone finds this picture. But so in the US, I was very active in the American Astronomical Society, and we used to organize big parties at the American Astronomical Society meetings, like after one day of the meeting, not part of the meeting, separate from the meeting. And people would, like, at some point there would be thousands of people coming to them, and we would start organizing the party on the Sunday evening before the meeting started. We'd have the party on Wednesday evening. So you've got to go to a city you've never been to before, find a venue that will believe that you're bringing 3,000 astronomers to come and party at their venue, which is tough going, but we did. But Neil was one of our biggest party-going fans, and one evening, I will always remember, in Pasadena, we just found the location for the party, so it was Sunday evening, and Neil Tyson and Bill Nye, I don't know if you know Bill Nye, the science guy. Yeah. So Neil Tyson and Bill Nye are sitting at the bar together. This sounds like the start of a joke, but it's the start of reality. And then, so me and my friend had found the location. We know where it is, but we print these little invitation things, but we hadn't done that yet because that's the next day. But Neil's like, oh, come tell me where the party is, and he's like, always so desperate to know, and so we're like telling him where it's going to be, got the venue. He's like saving all the details in his phone. He's like, I have to escape from like my handlers, because he always has people like telling him where to go and do what next, which he did manage to do. And then he's like telling like Bill, so do you want to go too? They can give you the info as well. And he's like, oh no, and just like tries to give us an autograph on something. Like, no, Bill, right, you don't get it. But yeah, Neil is a good party goer, very, very sweaty on the dance floor, is the way I would describe it, as you can see from the photograph, if that was the one you found.
Now I can't remember.
If it was at a conference hall, then I look much more sensible. That's the day before the party, so he's less sweaty.
Well, here we have a podcast exclusive. Well, I think we're just about to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you had fun. It was very informative for us.
Enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And this is actually our final episode before we break for the summer. So thanks so much for listening to us every other week for the past however many months it's been. And we'll see you in September. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.